Hello, friends, and welcome to Jewels of Truth. My name is Daniel Fontenot. I want to ask a question today. Has the papacy changed? We will answer that by reading an article by A.T. Jones in the American Sentinel of February 1st, 1894. I believe that we should answer that question, especially today more than ever before. There is abroad a general disposition to apologize and make excuses for and to flatter the papacy. This is not to be wondered at on the part of what is called the secular press of the country, as that is practically controlled directly or indirectly by the papacy. But it is a mystery how religious papers, professedly Protestant, can shut their eyes to the encroachments of the papacy and labor to convince themselves and the public that the papacy is not what it used to be, but is enlightened, modernized, and even Americanized. Now, I'm going to break away from this article here just for a moment and read a passage from the book, The Great Controversy, page 571 to 572. Which says, "The Roman Church now presents a fair front to the world, covering with apologies her record of horrible cruelties. She has clothed herself in Christ-like garments, but she is unchanged. Every principle of the papacy that existed in past ages exists today. The doctrines devised in the darkest ages are still held. Let none deceive themselves. The papacy that Protestants are now so ready to honor is the same that ruled the world in the days of the Reformation, when men of God stood up at the peril of their lives to expose her iniquity. She possesses the same pride and arrogant assumption that lorded it over kings and princes and claimed the prerogatives of God. Her spirit is no less cruel and despotic now than when she crushed out human liberty and slew the saints of the Most High. The papacy is just what prophecy declared that she would be, the apostasy of the latter times." And 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, verses 3 and 4 is referenced. It is a part of her policy to assume the character which will best accomplish her purpose. But beneath the variable appearance of the chameleon, she conceals the invariable venom of the serpent. Faith ought not to be kept with heretics, nor persons suspected of heresy. She declares, "Shall this power," and this is a good question to ask, "shall this power, whose record for 1,000 years is written in the blood of the saints, be now acknowledged as a part of the Church of Christ?" It is not without reason that the claim has been put forth in Protestant countries that Catholicism differs less widely from Protestantism than in former times. There has been a change, but the change is not in the papacy. Catholicism indeed resembles much of the Protestantism that now exists, because Protestantism has so greatly degenerated since the days of the Reformers. As the Protestant churches have been seeking the favor of the world, false charity has blinded their eyes. Now get that statement. False charity has blinded the eyes of the Protestant churches because they believe all these niceties, all these, the ostensibly nice ways in which the papal clergy act sometimes, and their charity, This false charity has blinded the eyes of the Protestant churches. They do not see but that it is right to believe good of all evil, and as the inevitable result, they will finally believe good, or rather evil, of all good. Instead of standing in defense of the faith once delivered to the saints, They are now, as it were, apologizing to Rome for their uncharitable opinion of her, begging pardon for their bigotry. A large class, even of those who look upon Romanism with no favor, apprehend little danger from her power and influence. Many urge that the intellectual and moral darkness prevailing during the Middle Ages favored the spread of her dogmas, superstitions, and oppression, and that the greater intelligence of modern times, the general diffusion of knowledge, and the increasing liberality in matters of religion forbid a revival of intolerance and tyranny. The very thought that such a state of things will exist in this enlightened age is ridiculed. It is true that great light, intellectual, moral, and religious, is shining upon this generation. In the open pages of God's holy word, light from heaven has been shed upon the world. But it should be remembered that the greater the light bestowed, the greater the darkness of those who pervert and reject it. A prayerful study of the Bible would show Protestants the real character of the papacy and would cause them to abhor and to shun it. Yeah, instead of for example, the General Conference President of the Seventh-day Adventist Church making nice with the Pope of Rome, a prayerful study of the Bible and the spirit of prophecy would cause Seventh-day Adventists also to abhor and to shun the papacy, to shun the Pope and his clerics. But many are so wise in their own conceit that they feel no need of humbly seeking God that they may be led into the truth. Although priding themselves on their enlightenment, they are ignorant both of the Scriptures and of the power of God. They must have some means of quieting their consciences, and they seek that which is least spiritual and humiliating. What they desire is a method of forgetting God, which will pass as a method of remembering Him. Yes, this is what Protestants desire. A method of forgetting God. What's that? What is that? Wouldn't that be Sunday keeping, enforcement of Sunday observance? Because, the fourth commandment says, remember the seventh day, the Sabbath day, to keep it holy. But they desire a method of forgetting God, Sunday observance, which shall pass as a method of remembering Him. Sorry, it doesn't meet God's standard. The papacy is well adapted to meet the wants of all these. It is prepared for two classes of mankind. Two classes of mankind, embracing nearly the whole world. Who are those two classes of mankind? Those who would be saved by their merits, that is, the conservatives, and those who would be saved in their sins, that's the liberals. Here is the secret of its power. And you can apply this broadly, not only in the religious realm, but also in the political realm. The papacy is prepared for two parties, two political parties, the Republicans and the Democrats. Doesn't matter who's in power, she's prepared for either one of them. She can work through either one, and she does. She worked in the past administration, and she is now working in the present administration. So, and that was from Great Controversy, page 571, 572. Now we continue with Elder A.T. Jones's article. Mystery though it be, however, it is an undeniable fact that the religious papers, professedly Protestant, which stand as the leading Protestant papers of the country, do labor diligently and constantly to convince themselves and the public that the papacy is not what it really is. True, They find it a difficult task which they have thus set themselves in the face of the numerous bold movements which the papacy is making in her old time and native spirit before all the people. But yet heroically do they stick to the task and seem determined to accomplish it, not only in spite of the difficulties, but in spite of the papacy itself. There is a considerable number of these papers, but the chiefest one, and engaged most earnestly in this difficult and mischievous business, is the Independent of this city, and a paper or periodical called the Independent. It has been thus engaged a good while, but as the papacy grows more bold and its native spirit becomes more openly apparent, the Independent seems the more determined to convince itself and others that all these things only mark the further progress of the papacy in enlightenment and in its modernizing and Americanizing tendency. For instance, last October there was sent by the Catholic hierarchy an official and authoritative communication to the quote-unquote editors of Catholic newspapers, commanding them to, quote, learn to be obedient and submissive to superiors, that neither they themselves nor those who assist them could attack ecclesiastics and, above all, bishops, and that, above all, let the name of bishops be sacred among Catholic writers, for to them reverence is due because of their high office and dignity. Nor let them think themselves privileged to examine critically what divinely appointed pastors, in exercise of their power, have established, etc. That is so arrogant, so very arrogant. This the Independent printed and then commented upon it. So the Independent printed these words, these quotes here from the Catholic hierarchy, and it says, we should like to know upon what meat these our bishops feed, that they have grown so great as to be above criticism by the press. Yeah, what are these bishops feeding on? The Independent rightly asks, that they have grown so great as to be above criticism by the press. Obedience and submission to superiors is right within the limits of administration, but opinion cannot be thus controlled, nor the expression of it limited. A bishop has a right to govern his diocese, but he has no right to pretend that he never makes a mistake or cannot be criticized. We should like to know why a Catholic editor should not have the privilege to examine critically what divinely appointed pastors have established. Divinely appointed pastors can establish very unwise things. We are interested to know what those ecclesiastical penalties are by which editors are to be prevented from criticizing a bishop's method of administration. We suppose the most effective method will be for the bishop to pronounce his censure upon the journal and forbid his people to subscribe to it. That has been tried in Cincinnati with great success, but it is not the American way of doing things, and we do not believe it is the Christian way of doing things, unquote. Okay, so that's the end of this statement by the Independent, a Protestant journal. Now, A.T. Jones breaks in and he says, and yet, in the very same issue, October 26, 1893, and in the editorial columns too, the Independent says this, quote, Archbishop Ireland and Bishop McGoldrick appeared last week in Chicago on the platform of the Women's Christian Temperance Union. the nearer we come together, the better we will like each other. So what is this? Now the Independent just flip-flops and changes its tune. Let's see what happens. So Brother Jones now continues, and he says, Archbishop Ireland and Bishop McGoldrick were, with the others, the authors of that communication of arrogance and superiority addressed to editors of Catholic newspapers, which the Independent mildly criticizes, and then, almost in the same breath, declares of these same men, quote, the nearer we come together, the better we will like each other, unquote. Yes, Brother Jones says, yes, after swallowing such a dose of papal superiority as that, we should think you would. No doubt, the more of it you can have, the better you will like it all. About the same time that the foregoing instance occurred, there occurred also another which is well worth mentioning. The Committee of the Inquisition of Rome put upon the Index Expurgatorius certain books and writings. So they evidently, the Committee of the Inquisition of Rome has an index of expurgatorius books and writings. That is, it condemned and outlawed them so far as its power now goes. So these books are condemned, outlawed in this index of expurgatorius books. Among these condemned writings was a series of articles by a certain Catholic which had been printed in 3 numbers of a leading magazine. When the notice of the condemnation of these writings was published, the Independent said of it, quote, we now translate the directions given to the faithful in reference to these books. Therefore let no one of whatsoever rank or condition dare in future either to publish or to read or to keep these above-mentioned condemned and proscribed works, but let him deliver them over to the local bishops or to the inquisitors of heretical doctrine under the penalties which have been prescribed in the index of forbidden books. We understand then that any Catholic who has a copy of these numbers of the 19th century is under immediate obligation to mail them to the bishop of his diocese. He is not allowed to keep a perfect file of the volume for 1892 and 1893 under the penalties prescribed. Mr. St. George Mivart has, since the publication of this act, obediently signified his retraction of the opinions advanced in the articles but now condemned as unsound teaching. He has proved himself quite childlike. These articles have been printed in part in a good many Catholic papers, and we do not doubt that they are in the possession of many priests and laymen. We have some curiosity to know how far this injunction to send the interdicted writings to the bishop and no longer to read them has become a dead letter. We are in earnest when we say that we want to know whether this edict is a dead letter in the United States. We have had beautiful addresses in Chicago from Cardinal Gibbons and Bishop Keene and Archbishop Ireland and dozens of other distinguished and representative Catholics, telling us about the liberality of the Pope and his sympathy with free institutions, his love for republics and the freedom of the American Catholic Church. We believe it all. And yet, what are we to do with such an edict as that which we have just translated out of the original Latin? Citizens of the United States, American Catholics who love liberty, are forbidden by an excellent gentleman in Rome, the Pope, either to read or to have in their houses 3 different numbers of the 19th century. This is not fiction, it is fact. A dozen or so of his advisors have passed upon those articles, and they say that American Catholic citizens shall not read them. Now, what liberty is there about that? Why is it not downright spiritual tyranny? How does it agree with the beautiful sentiments which we have heard? Is it really expected that this edict will be obeyed? Will Bork, Cochrane, and will Dr. Bartzell immediately send to Archbishop Corrigan their copies of these three numbers of the 19th century, or of any of the Catholic papers in their possession which have reprinted the articles? We are confused. We are puzzled. We do not know how to work out a problem in which one of the factors is 2 equals 3. And that was from the Independent of October 5th, 1893. Now, Brother Jones, in response, says, "But dear Independent, how can you keep from being confused and puzzled with a, quote, problem in which one of the factors is 2 equals 3, unquote, when you yourself create that factor in the problem by insisting in the face of all mathematical evidence and principle that 2 does equal 3? Anyone who will give to papal figuring the true value of the factors that enter into all her problems will never be either confused or puzzled. To the extent of its power, the Papal Inquisition is now precisely what it always has been. The papacy itself is today precisely what it always has been. This is not fiction, it is fact. This announcement of the Inquisition demonstrates that. And if today the papacy had sufficient power in the United States over others than her own membership, she would enforce this inquisitional decree upon all of whatsoever rank or condition, whether they be Catholic or not. Of course, we have had beautiful, questionably beautiful, addresses in Chicago and many other places from Cardinal Gibbons and Bishop Keene and Archbishop Ireland and dozens of other distinguished and representative Catholics, and from the Independent and the Christian at Work and the Evangelist and other distinguished and representative Protestant papers, so-called Protestant, telling us about the liberality of the Pope and his sympathy with free institutions, his love for republics, etc., etc., etc. But we do not believe a single word of it all. Every word of it is only a papal lie. The liberality of the Pope? Yes, yes, and the green cheese of the moon. His sympathy with free institutions is taffy, broad-minded, liberal-ideaed, advanced Protestants. His love for republics? Oh yes, now we have struck it. The Pope loves republics. Especially does he love the American Republic. He has actually told us so himself. He has sent Satoli over here as his personal representative, not only to tell us so again and again, but to show us how much the Pope loves the American Republic. Yes, indeed, the Pope loves this republic. There is no doubt of that. The lion loves lambs too, and even the spider loves flies. And Pope Leo the 13th, and I would add to that Pope Leo the 14th, says of America and its people, "I love them, and I love their country. I have great tenderness for those who live in that land, Protestants and all." And that's from the Chicago Herald, September 5th, 1893, page 9. So, again, a few weeks ago, a Catholic circular originating from Baltimore was distributed, raising and agitating the question of the appointment of the public school fund to the denominational schools in proportion to membership, and stating that this question would be brought before the Maryland legislature this present winter. About the same time, a bill to the same purpose was framed by a Catholic to be presented to the New York legislature, which is not in session. It was given out as from Archbishop Corrigan of this city that the Catholic authorities were in no wise responsible for this New York bill. But Dr. Michael Walsh, editor of the Catholic Herald and sponsor of the bill, says that, quote, the bill has been examined by the cardinals and clergy at Rome and is approved by them, and that it has also been submitted to and practically approved by the leading clergy and the most prominent men in the Catholic Church in this country. The Independent wrote to Cardinal Gibbons asking him about the Baltimore Circular and whether he or Sertoli had signed it. The Cardinal answered that neither he nor Sertoli had signed any such circular, and further that he was certain that no such circular has any existence except in the imagination of people ever open to suspicion. As the circular had been described in the daily papers and been published in Catholic papers, the Independent, thinking there might be some misapprehension on the part of the Cardinal as to what its first letter meant, sent a second letter enclosing a copy of the circular, to which the Cardinal replied that it did not emanate from him and was not published with his authorization, but had appeared without his knowledge and consent. Next, the Independent sent out a letter to the archbishops and bishops of the Catholic Church in the United States, asking whether, number one, whether it is the policy of the Catholic Church to favor the division of the public school fund, and two, whether they personally would countenance such division. In its issue of January 11, 1894, the Independent publishes the replies of 30 bishops and archbishops to these questions. Of these 30 replies, only one says plainly that he is opposed to it. 2 are indefinite, 6 are clearly evasive, while the other 21 are in favor of it, some with conditions and others rapidly and unconditionally. And one of these gives the words of Cardinal Gibbons that, quote, this Catholic education our children cannot have in the public schools, therefore we wish to have our own schools, and as we cannot without the help of the state, we desire a share of the public school fund to enable us to have such schools, unquote. So tax money for public schools, tax money to support Catholic schools has been pushed for a long time. Now, from this whole record, it is as clear as day that this Baltimore Circular and this New York bill and the agitation raised by them are all gotten up only as feelers by which to test the public pulse upon this question, which is fraught with the most vital consequences to the government and people of the United States. As it seems they have found that the time is not yet ripe for its success, they will doubtless let the matter drop for a while to be sprung again as soon as possible, and so little by little work the thing along till they can make it win. And yet, as plain as all this is to anybody who will see, the Independent puts forth these words on the subject. Quote, we should divest ourselves as far as possible of the prejudice which believes that they are in the habit of masking their real intentions and moving in mysterious ways. So they're saying this about the papacy, that we should divest ourselves as far as possible of the prejudice which believes that they, the papacy, are in the habit of masking their real intentions and moving in mysterious ways. By the way, the papacy in the Bible is represented as the mystery of iniquity. The mystery of iniquity. And now Brother Jones continues and he says, but why do we need to present any more or even these evidences that the papacy is today the same politic, deceitful craft, mistress of witchcrafts and mother of abominations that she ever was? Why should we seek by these evidences to point out the willing blindness of such papers, when we have the plain and positive statement of Cardinal Gibbons, lately published broadcast in the daily papers, that the papacy is today precisely what it always was? Here are his words. Cardinal Gibbons says, we must remember that the Catholic Church is the oldest institution in this country. Not really. The Protestant churches are the oldest. Here, as in the old world, with the passage of time, everything else has changed. Her organization, her principles, her doctrines, her rites are precisely the same today as they were when Columbus first landed. The forms of government have altered, new nationalities with new customs and new ideas have come, but the teachings, the procedure, the forms, the structure of the Catholic Church are identically what they were when the first Catholic priest raised the cross on American soil. And that was a quote from Catholic Times, October 21st, 1893. Now, Brother Jones continues, and he addresses this statement by Cardinal Gibbons, and he says, since Columbus first landed on American soil, the Inquisition was carried on in its fullest extent in every one of its horrible methods. Since that date, Martin Luther and all Protestants and Protestantism were absolutely condemned and outlawed in the world. Since that date, multitude of Protestants have been persecuted to death, thousands of them being burnt to death by the procedure, quote-unquote, procedure of the Catholic Church. All this terrible record of the papacy has been made since Columbus first landed on American soil. Cardinal Gibbons declares that she is in all things, quote-unquote, precisely and identically the same today that she was then. There is not the least doubt that this is the absolute truth. And by the same token, all these beautiful expressions as to the liberality of the Catholic Church and the love of the Pope for the Protestants are sheer papal lies. In view of this and the other evidences which we have now presented, which are open and apparent and known to all, what can possibly be the cause of this apparently willful willingness on the part of professed Protestants to make the papacy appear to be what it certainly is not, and what it says itself that it is not? The only conceivable explanation of it that we can find is that these professed Protestants have so degenerated that they have become so entirely like the papacy in structure, in aim, and in spirit, that they themselves see that they and the papacy are precisely alike, and being therefore incapable of seeing or admitting that they are wrong, they decide at once that the papacy has changed and become enlightened and modernized and Americanized, and the evidence upon which they convince themselves that this is certainly so is only that she is so exactly like themselves that there is no perceptible difference, and therefore it must be so and is so. And I believe, dear friends, this is the problem with the leadership in the Seventh-day Adventist Church. They have done the same thing that these Protestants have done. The reason why, let me kind of go through this again and kind of repeat it, but only apply it to the Seventh-day Adventist leadership. The only conceivable explanation of why these professed Protestants make the papacy appear to be, or these professed Seventh-day Adventists appear, these professed Seventh-day Adventists make it appear that the papacy has changed, that it is not what it used to be. The only reason why they would do that, why Seventh-day Adventist leadership would do that, like this guy named Ganon Diop, the so-called secretary of the, or the leader of the Department of Religious Liberty in the Seventh-day Adventist Church, people like him and others, B.B. Beach in the past, okay, even Neil Wilson, all right? The only conceivable explanation of it that we can find is that these professed Seventh-day Adventists have so degenerated that they have become so entirely like the papacy in structure, in aim, and in spirit, that they themselves see that they and the papacy are precisely alike, and being therefore incapable of seeing or admitting that they are wrong, they decide at once that the papacy has changed and become enlightened and modernized and Americanized. And the evidence upon which they convince themselves that this is certainly so is only that she is so exactly like themselves that there is no perceptible difference, and therefore it must be so and is so. The Scripture showed long ago that in this country there would arise a living image of the papacy. And when things have come to pass that the leading Protestant representatives cannot themselves find any material difference between themselves and the papacy, it is evident that the Scripture is fulfilled of Revelation 13:11-17. Well, there you have it. Has the papacy changed? I don't think so. It is the same as what it was in the Dark Ages. Well, if you agree with this presentation and would like to share it with others, please tap that like button at the bottom of this video so that it can be sent far and wide to those who are hungering for the truth in these last days. And if you have any questions or comments, you can place them at the bottom of this video. And if you haven't subscribed, we would highly encourage you to do so. Thank you for joining us here at Jewels of Truth. We hope and pray that you will have a good day in the Lord.